You gotta say action, right?
Action.
Is it on recording?
Yes, it is.
All right, this is a completely different. All right, guys. It is not actually a presentation. I don't have a presentation for you. It was never meant for presentation. The request was to give or provide a basic description of the countries which you as a business operate in. Well, I haven't done that either. What I have done is for you to see, to think through and analyze different countries. I got the countries here are Cyprus, Slovenia, Greece, Bulgaria, and Israel. I can do them in any order. And what I did was I go to the IMF website and pull down, select some data. So which are the data which I selected? We gotta see how the first one is gross domestic product, which is in national currency. Gross domestic product is a macroeconomic indicator. It's the size of the economy. The second one is gross domestic product percentage change. Percentage change means the growth rate of the economy. In other words, one is how big the economy is, the other one is how fast is growing or shrinking. The next one is gross domestic product per capita. Why? Because the number of people in the economy could be growing, and if the economy is not growing, but the people are growing, this means per capita is actually shrinking, okay? And this means, per capita means average income. In a sense, the per capita measures what we call the standard of living. And when we look at per capita, I don't know, which country do we have right now? Let's try Cyprus, okay? We'll look here at Cyprus. Per capita, I'm just picking the numbers. They're, I know, small to see, but let's see what happens over here. You see now what happens? 168, these are the years. Okay, you see the years 2001, 2, 3. So I pulled about the last 12 or 13 years. And you see what happens? 168, 170, 71, 76, 18, 84, 88, 90. Aha! And then see what happens. From 190, it falls down to 182. It's a major drop in 1 year on per capita.
19, not 190. Okay, it doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
19 to 18. Okay, to 17, 9, 17, 5, 16, 9. So the numbers are shrinking. All right, let's see what else, what other numbers we have. Indicators. Another one which I decided to choose is total investment. Total investment is how much businesses, also maybe individuals, are overall investing in the economy. What is the investment indicator? It's indicator number one of the confidence of businesses. If businesses are confident, they invest more. But these total investments are also indicator of future growth. Economic productivity and growth depend on past investments. It's that simple. You make an investment today, you're going to be producing and growing more tomorrow. You're shrinking your investment today, it's not going to be. And if you look at what total investment is, you see here very quickly how total investment is a percent of GDP. As a percentage of GDP, how it's been 16, 18, 19, 19, 20, 21, 25. Oh, amazing that the economy of Cyprus investments aren't falling that much. This is very interesting. So,
It fell at the end.
yes, no. I understand it fell at the end, but the fall is small. And when we look at other economies, we see that sometimes they fall a lot more. Again, the idea for you to understand, the first step, the different indicators which I chose, and then we're going to just look or scan through them. The next one is inflation, and I chose, because there are different measures, just average consumer prices. This is what you pay for
CPI.
milk, gasoline. Yes, that's the CPI. But You got many different measures of the CPI. This is just the average consumer prices as opposed to the consumer price index, and it gives you percentages of inflation. Now, another one which is volume of imports. Volume of imports tells you if the economy is strong and it's got the ability to buy foreign goods, okay? And the other one is volume of exports. Hey, is business good? Volume of exports. And it's here, I did exports of goods and services. Why? For Cyprus, a major export is actually the service of tourism, right? Or other types of services. In general services, it's just a service economy. So services are very important, and for some economies, the export sector is critical. I understand for Cyprus, it's very important, right? Export-driven economy in a sense. Also, I have unemployment. You just want to see what the unemployment looks like. In general, that's a major macroeconomic indicator. Government net lending and borrowing. So we just want to see what's the government borrowing, and I've done it as a percentage of GDP. In other words, is the government running huge deficits or not? Okay. And the next one is general government gross debt. So here is how much deep in debt is the government.
This includes domestic borrowing. Is it only external borrowing?
It should be both.
Should be both.
As long as the government borrowed the money, whether borrowed from home or abroad, domestic or foreign, it doesn't matter.
The 60% of the Maastricht condition covers only external borrowing, or includes everything?
No, this is percentage of GDP. If the economy is 100,000, 60% is 60.
In Maastricht there was...
Okay. The Maastricht criteria says that a country should not go over 60%, but in Germany and in France and now all of Europe, that's pretty much dead. It's a letter of the law, but no one complies with it. That's a completely different story. And another one which I chose, which is a very critical, is the current account balance. And the current account balance is basically the difference between import and export. And if it's a negative number, you import more than you export. If you have a current account negative, what's called a trade deficit or current account deficit, means you're losing money to foreign countries. Either you have money which you pay out your imports, or the alternative is you go deeper in debt. But you can go deeper in debt, not the government. It could be private businesses going, like banks going. In other words, it either means you're losing money down or you're going up. Usually, current account imbalances usually mean big trouble down the road. Means you either build up debt that you cannot service, or the alternative is you pay down with reserves and you hit the wall. Okay?
Who is monitoring and reporting this current account balance? If
Well,
it is a mix of everything?
I don't. Now, what they have is what you at least should do if you're interested. You go to the IMF website, and on the IMF they have a data reporting data section, and on each data point, we call observation, on each variable, you can see what exactly it is and how it's collected and how it's reported. In other words, what is the definition of the variable and what's the reporting unit? That's for you. The detail is not as important, at least for me. What I want to see is the big picture, and the big picture, are there any major problems? So let me try to summarize a little bit, because what you're asking basically is what I teach in lecture number 1 in macroeconomics. On the first day, the kids, when they come out of high school and they come in the classroom, I tell them macroeconomics is about 6 or 7 important variables, which you call indicators. And these are, number 1, GDP, which measures the size of the economy and economic growth. Number 2, inflation. Number 3, employment. So, the size of the economy, inflation, employment or unemployment, which is the same thing. Then, the size of the government or government deficit. Then, the size of foreign countries the trade deficit. Here it's the current account balance or deficit. Then the next big one is the value of the currency. I did not choose the value of the currency because we're in Europe and whatnot. That's not as important. And as you can see, I've also chose a little extra one. I chose, let's say, total investment. I kind of like chose because it sometimes could be very indicative. And we just get to take a look at some of the data, and you get to see what you see. The idea is, instead of providing, you see now GDP growing 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and then 14, 15, 15. So what we see is this is the economy of Cyprus. Has not been terribly affected. When you see the growth rate, you see 3, 4, 4, minus 2, plus 1, plus minus 2. So the economy of Cyprus, at least GDP, suggests that things have not been terrible, okay? That's what the GDP suggests. In terms of, let's see what's the next variable. Well, I gotta see how I'm gonna do this, scrolling back and forth. Oh, per capita. Per capita, the next one is per capita. You see 18, 19, 18, 17, 17. We see that the standards of living also haven't been falling. In other words, it appears that over the last 4 years, the economy of Cyprus has not been affected too much. Let's see what's the next one. Next one is investment. Yes. For the investment, you see 19, 20, 21, 23, small fall. 19, 16, 13. Oh, is that investment here? Number 5. So what I see is a collapse in investments. That's what I see from these numbers. I see here, you see from 23 in 2009-19, that's a huge 20% collapse. Then 19 is holding, then 16. So the depression keeps, you know, the pressure on the economy. And then you see 13. What's the next one? Number 6, CPI. Inflation, you see 4, 0, 2, 3. It appears from government statistics that inflation is not a problem, is it? Or it's not? Huh? No, not really a problem. Okay. The guy says, what's number 7? Okay. You see imports, what the number is. Let's do the trade balance. What I see here is that trade balance suddenly in 2007 was huge, in 2008 was huge, 2009 is huge. So apparently Cyprus has huge current account balance problem. Somehow it's importing a lot more than it's exporting. And let's see what's government doing there. What the government is.
Sorry, can I say this?
Yes.
This is percentage of GDP. Okay.
As a percent of GDP. So 10% more they are importing than they're exporting.
It falls to 3% in 2012, however.
Okay.
Yes, this is okay. It falls
But that's
to
on 10% of previous year, correct?
okay. It falls to 3%. What's the explanation?
No, it's every year based on the current year's GDP.
Let's explain this, guys. It's very simple. It simply means that people in Cyprus aren't importing. It simply means they aren't buying BMWs as much. They aren't driving their cars and importing gasoline as much. Okay? It simply means that suddenly they shrank their imports. When an economy is in recession, the first thing people do is they cut down on their imports. So when you're buying, people still buy some food, but they're not going to buy the luxury BMW. They're not going to buy the luxury watch. They're not going to buy maybe the expensive mobile. Or they won't be buying as much as they would. So last year they were importing 1 million. Now they're importing 500,000. That helps the trade deficit.
One question, here. Okay, this is all interesting, but if economy is deteriorating year on year, let's say we take the best year, for example, maybe it's 2008, and is it not better than to see how economy is doing if you compare it to a specific period, because you lose the sense of what cumulatively happened to the country over a period of time. If you're only looking into the year, this 3% doesn't mean much compared to minus 10%. But if they less imported 10% last year, at the same time GDP started continue dropping, less 3% this year to GDP is maybe even worse than last year.
What's the question? Is the question about the frequency? Why we're looking annual and you want quarterly? What's the question?
No, I think the situation is worse than it shows because there is a cumulative impact.
Yes, of course.
For one thing, over a period of years. So the fact that some percentage is dropping doesn't mean people are recovering in their well-being.
Correct, yeah, of course. Well, I mean, that's part of, for now, number one is you understand what the variable means, okay? Number two, you see what the numbers are, you see what the trends are, and then you can get into deeper understanding. You see what I'm saying? We're just trying step by step. Right now, let's see. So, what we know is that investments have big problems. For some reason, people aren't investing. Businesses aren't investing. So, investment. For some reason, the trade deficit shrank means people aren't importing. In other words, maybe just this year, the economy, people are getting really scared and people begin to realize that the economy is not improving. Is there such a thing? Like in the last 2 or 3 years, people just think that
the last 1.5 years.
Yeah, that the crisis is just going to go away and we're going to back to normal. Yeah. And over a year and a half, people get to realize that problems are way bigger and aren't going away. I mean, we had the same thing in Bulgaria. Every time we hear the government telling us the same, we are just about at the bottom of the crisis and things are just going to get better. But they don't, and they don't, and they don't. And after 2 or 3 years, people realize, things aren't getting better, we better cut down. We better don't buy the house, we better don't buy the expensive car, or don't buy a car at all. We better don't buy the expensive mobile, we get the cheap one. People begin to adjust. We're not going to go 5 times out in a restaurant, we're going to go 3 times. We're not going to go twice to a movie. We're going to go once a month to a movie. You have different ways to cut. You turn off the light at the kitchen, you lower the refrigerator a little bit. Temperature at home from 20 degrees, you lower to 19. You're not going to die or freeze, right? With just a little bit. So people make these little adjustments once they see that these are not just temporary problems. So let me see what else. Okay, I shrank a little bit here, and I shrank so that we can actually see a little better of what's happening. Okay, so we can see now. All right, what about unemployment rate? Unemployment rate, from 3.9, 3.6, suddenly you see unemployment rate shooting up. You see 3.6, 5. That's a big jump. From 5 to 6, from 6 to 7. And here is the one what our colleague from Cyprus says. From 2011 to 2012, it's a huge jump in unemployment from 7 to almost 12%.
That's why current account dropped. If everyone is unemployed.
Yes, if everyone is unemployed, they can't pay. Yes. So a current account, a current account drop. The explanation is that people aren't having jobs and aren't able to buy those laptops, those mobiles, those cars. So people are cutting down on all sorts of imports because most imports aren't necessity. You got a 40-year laptop, you're not going to throw it away to buy a new one, going to use it for 5 years. You got a 3-year-old mobile, you're not going to buy a replacement, you're going to wait for 1 or 2 more years, okay? It's not good. You got a 10-year-old car, you're not going to replace it now, going to drive it for another 1 or 2 years. So these are the different ways that families adjust and adapt. So on Cyprus, let's see, any questions before I switch to another country? Of course, I have prepared these data and you have them so that you can all look at your leisure or at a later time. Anything else? Gross debt. Well, here's what I'm seeing. This is what I see. Gross debt is this number here. What I'm seeing here is gross government debt is manageable, okay. And in the last 2 years, 87% of GDP tells me that the Cyprus government is in deep, deep debt. In other words, increasing from 61 to 87%. In other words, 26% in 2 years is a catastrophic result, is a catastrophic response. And here's the worst part. As the government is increasing the debt by 10, 12% a year for 25% in 2 years, the result is skyrocketing unemployment. So essentially the government increased all of this spending and it didn't help the labor market. It didn't help economic growth. It just made things all. It probably would have been better the government not to spend the money and let the economy readjust because
Here the picture.
Okay.
The increase you see there is because of the government has provided 2 billion euro support to one of the banks. That's what you see in 2012.
well, there you have
And
it.
it will go to 140 in 2013 because
Okay,
the rest of
so-
the banks need money.
Okay, so all right, let's explain what this means. It simply means that a bank went bankrupt. A bank usually goes bankrupt because it provided bad loans. Usually for a real estate, you
No,
probably
it's Greek government bonds.
okay, for Greek government bonds. Okay, so you can see how a Greek problem can affect a little country like Cyprus, but we are connected to Greece like that. So
The
a
whole
little
world
Greece.
is connected to
Yeah, the whole
for
world. Well,
years.
yes, Germany is connected to Greece for sure. France is connected to Greece. We saw last time on our presentation, practically most of European countries are connected to Greece. So if something happens in Greece, hey, we, Bulgaria, could be the next to fall through the banking connection, okay? So you see government debt is skyrocketing. Now, this is exactly what I was explaining in my last presentation here, which was that as banks invest inappropriately and they go bankrupt, the government comes in, issues debt, supports the bank, in this case one bank, and now the government is also on the road to bankruptcy itself. So the problem with government supporting banks is that the government fixes a short-term problem. It should just let the bank go bankrupt, okay, with whatever the consequences are. We say in English, let the chips fall where they may.
Just another point, sorry I interview all the time, but if you leave a government in bank go bankrupt,
Right.
you have the guarantees of the government on
Yeah.
deposits,
Yeah.
and the government could not afford the collapse of the system because we are talking about
Look,
the deposits guarantees
understand
being
what you're-
14 billion in
Right.
a GDP of 15.
I understand. The comparison is very simple. In the one case, you cut the finger and you suffer the pain, okay, and you lose the finger. In the other case, the government going bankrupt, you cut the whole damn hand. And that's what's going to happen. Because as soon as the government go bankrupt, then all other banks will simultaneously and jointly go bankrupt. And most of the businesses will go bankrupt. And the retirees will effectively be starving. So what you're saying is, yes, you're just telling me, oh, but if the government lets the bank go bankrupt, things are going to be bad. And I'm saying, yeah, sure, of course they will be bad. But now, with that debt, I promise you, things will be way, way, way worse. You understand? Because
But the
when-
government, I'm not sure if I agree. You will have exactly the same effect in either way. Because
No,
if you lose two systemic banks,
yeah, or
okay,
10.
and the government has to step in
Whoa,
because
whoa, whoa, whoa,
of
whoa,
the guarantees,
whoa, whoa, whoa,
the government will
whoa,
go
whoa,
bankrupt
whoa,
in
whoa.
any case.
Stop, no, that's have to say. You see, here's the key difference which I'm trying to see. It's a very important difference. It is one thing when two banks go bankrupt, but the government survives. If the government survives, it can keep people, it can keep the bureaucracy, it can keep the
But that's my
retirees.
point. It cannot survive. That's my
No,
point.
no, that's not true. If the government, you see, the government can just say, we will pay 50% of all deposits. And you put your money in that bank, you suffer 50% loss.
So-
And you 50%. And you 50%. The point is,
But
the
it is an effective bankruptcy. It's an obligation that the government had.
Correct.
Meet.
Correct. But that's
The
a
only
better way.
But
But that's a better way to go bankrupt. What I'm saying is, in every single case, it's bad. That's not a question. But amongst 10 different choices of different outcomes, some are better and some are worse. And we know which one is the worst. The worst is the case when the government goes bankrupt with all the banks at the same time. And that's what you do when you go to 90, 100, 110%. You are on the road to the worst case scenario. Okay, it is always better to let the bank fall, two banks go down, you support the deposits as much as you can, you pay up 50 or 70% of the deposit, you keep the retirees going, you keep the bureaucracy going, the economy is going, two banks are bankrupt. Here is what's an example which proves you wrong, and that was Lehman Brothers. When Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, totally. Yes, the banking financial system froze for a moment, but the government stepped in, it guaranteed the others, and the bank disappeared. But doesn't mean that America went under the ocean. No, the economy goes, payment go, and all the other things go. So you better let the sick banks go down.
But after Lehman, they intervened and they saved the whole banking system.
Correct.
So you don't know the impact of.
Right, I understand. I understand. But what we know now is that's the worst policy, because now eventually the American government is going to go bankrupt. Now eventually the Cypriotic government is going to go bankrupt. Eventually the Greek government is going to go bankrupt. We know the French government is going to go bankrupt. And all governments are running towards the worst case scenario. Of course, we Bulgarians invented the concept. We did it the same. We went simultaneous bankruptcy of the government and the banks and most government businesses, because most businesses were government owned, and we all went bankrupt at the same time. And we had a sky high 40–50% unemployment. It was a disaster. People living on $10, $15 a month. In other words, people living on less than $1 a day. Most people starving, most people freezing, and all the other terrible things happening. But that's the point. They are racing towards the worst case scenario. Because, look, the comparison is called the gangrene. Gangrene is a disease where, part of the flesh dies, and when you have a gangrene, we know what you're supposed to do. You gotta cut the damn thing off. And if you don't let it cut it here, it keeps going towards the finger, you gotta cut the whole finger. And if you don't cut it, you're gonna keep going through the hand, you gotta cut the whole hand. And if you don't cut it off, it keeps moving on towards the whole arm, you gotta cut off the arm. But you say, well, do you have to cut it off? No, once it moves over here, game over, just there. So you either gotta cut later more, or just die. And that's pretty much what's happening here. It's the same logic, it's the same concept. All right, let's see any other questions of Cyprus before I move on to the next. Any questions? Any of the numbers that you're interested to look at? A picture fairly clear? I mean, you can look at the details of what you're interested in. I'm just trying to point what I see. Next country, which one? Which one?
Click on it.
Greece.
All right, let's see the giant mess the Greeks are in. Okay. Well, first of all, you see the GDP going 190, 203, 209, and then shrinking. 202, 95, 82, 71. Big shrink. Let's see what per capita has. Per capita has from 17, 18, 18, 18, 17, 16, 15. So you got a drop per capita, but interestingly enough, the drop per capita is small. Well, why? Because the government is running huge deficits to supplement. So instead of a big drop in the per capita income, the government is running the deficit and supplementing those incomes.
So, would it be interesting here maybe to know also what is the level of employment in public sector?
Well, it would be in general, yes. I did
because
not.
That's probably how this.
The percentage is not dramatically high if you compare it to other European countries.
Right, right. In Greece it's not dramatically high, but in Greece the salaries are relatively higher compared to the private sector. So a government bureaucrat against a government auto workers. In Germany, a government bureaucrat is not getting as much as a government auto worker. But in Greece, a government bureaucrat is getting more than a private worker somewhere in a business. So the problem is that even though the percentage is not higher, the relative burden on one person is much higher, and it poses.
And that is because of corruption, mainly. Because
Well,
there are a lot of ways to earn money in public sector.
All right, well, this is what I see as the biggest dramatic indication of how bad things are. Investment. And you can see from 25 falling to 23, falling to 18, to 16, to 14, to 12, and expected to fall to 10, to maybe even 7, and God knows how low it will go. But total investment is telling you that things are really, really, really bad. Next one, unemployment. I'm clicking on unemployment. You see 8, 7, 9, 12, 17, and this is over here where you see the big jump. So essentially you see in 2011 and in 2012 the sky. So this is where the crisis has really hit, finally, the Greek people. You also see what else? Greece government gross debt. Well, you can see what's happening. 100%, 100%, 97, 98, 100, 100, 100. So up to 2007, things are fairly stable. It's easy to see. And then 112, maybe not too much. But in 2009, from 112, you go to 129.
That's the impact of the austerity measures.
Right. And this is the government measures, and these are the official statistics, which are, we call them managed. It's called massaged, okay? These are numbers close to the truth. And then you got from 128 to 145, and then from 544, 165. So we are seeing in 3 years, Greek government debt exploding, which ensures the future. Well, the government already went twice or 3 times bankrupt, but they did not lower the overall debt burden. In other words, the creditors didn't suffer losses. So the Greek government will keep going
the
bankrupt.
creditors suffered losses.
Well, minor.
There was a 70% haircut. No.
No. You're repeating beautiful propaganda, which is of course not true. If
I'm not repeating.
Okay. All right. Let me cut down to the simple truth. If the government debt is $150 billion and creditors suffer 70% loss, the debt will go down from 150 billion to 50. But after the bankruptcy, the debt from 150 billion went up to 160 billion. So nothing really happened. What happened was there was a 70% loss on one small particular issue of bonds, which was 1% of the total debt outstanding. You understand? The government's got maybe 20, maybe 30, maybe 40 different issues of loans and bonds. And when a bond comes due, the government cannot pay. So on that particular bond, you may have haircut.
Not the money that were owned by the. That's clear.
Right.
We know this.
Right.
But the private creditors, they suffer 70% loss.
Right. On that.
That's what I'm saying.
Right. On that particular issue of bonds, which is 1 or 2% of the total outstanding debt, because they have bonds which mature in 2015. When these mature, the government's not going to pay. There are going to be other big losses. When in 2016 or 2014, so as bonds mature, there are going to be more and more and more piling losses, and more of those creditors will go bankrupt. You understand what I'm saying?
And it's important that this credit that we receive is to pay back high interest rates.
Yes, that's a yes.
Into the
That's on top
economy.
of everything else.
Yeah.
All right, so well, let's see.
And who is buying all these bonds, government bonds, in this type of situation?
In this type of situation, buys them those that are stupid or forced to do. So, first of all, or politically have no choice. So, number one, forced are Greek banks themselves. Government tells them, you have to buy them, otherwise you're in trouble or whatever the threat is. I mean, governments always have credible threats against the banks, and governments can always subordinate banks to do whatever is necessary in the interest of the government, because governments and banks are like that. When governments get in trouble, banks bail them out. When banks get in trouble, governments bail them out. It's called an unholy alliance, okay? And that's how government always has the power of different ways to force them. They can just say, hey.
And where's the money coming from for?
Well, out of thin air, out of Greek depositors. All right, so that's one way. Here's another way. You force, like the American government and other good governments, you force the retirement funds and the pension funds who have 10% in government bonds, the others are in foreign bonds, some are in commodities and others are in stock. They say, you increase from 10% to 20% and sell whatever. This is effectively, we call it correctly, raiding the social security system or raiding the pension system. Essentially, this is exactly what the Spanish government did. Over the last 4 months, this is what the Spanish government is issuing bonds. The world doesn't want to touch them because everybody knows that they're totally bankrupt. Then it forces the banks to buy them, but the bank says, we don't have money, we are bankrupt. Then the next thing they did is they look around and say, oh, there is some money over here in the pension fund. So the pension fund selling what they have and giving it to government. Essentially, the government is called siphoning off or milking. So the pension fund is now bankrupt. Now, what about our own Bulgarian government? How's our own Bulgarian government handling this issue? Well, we are also good at doing it. Number one, the first thing we did is, in Bulgaria, is, we got a nice savings of fiscal surpluses. So we run some fiscal surpluses in previous years, we take all the surplus, boom, we borrow it all. Good for us. So one major cushion for our economy is gone. The next thing we look around and say, there is money in the healthcare system. We have financed the healthcare system to the amount of €1 billion, whatever, it doesn't matter. And that's a surplus. Take it all, spend it all. And we did that. Now they're looking into the pension system, and now they're running up more debt. So they issue debt, some of the banks buy it, which means that you deposit their money to finance the government. And now the government is trying to issue loans to sell to other foreign banks, and just to sell to any funds and whatever, all right? So we're getting deeper into that. So that's what governments do. They first sell to they tax if they can. If they can't tax, they try to raise more debt. If they can't, they raid free money. If you force the bank to buy your debt, this is the same as taking the depositor's money. And if you force the pension fund to buy your debt, this is the same as stealing or taking the pensioner's money. And if you force the healthcare system, to buy your debt, this is the same as stealing the money from the healthcare system. And that's what governments do. They look around for a pile of money. When they see a pile of money, they just take it. All right, so let's see what else we got about Greece. Okay, well, you see these huge current account balances. So Greeks love those BMWs, right? Or Mercedes?
Porsche.
Cayenne, okay, the Porsche Cayenne, of course. Yeah, so the Porsche Cayenne, all right, that's a good one. You have the new one, not anymore, the Panamera. It's called Porsche Panamera.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, you haven't seen it because it was out in 2 years. If you go in Asia, like in Macau Tower in Hong Kong, you're going to see the Porsche Panamera, because, you know, it's been too recent, they've been too much in a crisis. But this is where, you know, these are, the deficits are BMWs and Porsches and Mercedes, and you see here the same fall. And it's still got to fall. This simply means that there is a lot more for the Greek economy to collapse. It's still in early stages.
Maybe these are the tax evaders.
Well, that's a whole different story. You see, that it's important to understand that for the macro economy, you can see the picture without the need. Are they gangsters? Are they tax evaders? Okay, are they the mafia? Are they government bureaucrats? It's irrelevant. You could still see what's going on irrespective of who they are, okay? As long as a Mercedes gets sold in Greece, that's what we want to see. It's money coming out of Greece and going into Germany. It doesn't matter, government bureaucrat, private or retiree, a military, it doesn't matter what it is. Okay, what else do we have? Total investment, we saw the complete collapse. Inflation, is inflation a big problem in Greece or not really?
If you take out the oil prices, which may impact, it's much less in 10 and 11.
But you gotta take the oil price because oil is part of life, right?
Yes, correct.
And then it's a problem, right? Let's see what else. Volume of imports, you can see 2510. Oh, wow. Volume of imports. You see imports, and then 10 minus 24, minus 11, minus 3. So you see that imports, it's actually a percent. The percentage imports are falling. So the economy is not importing a lot. You also see that exports fell huge in 2009. That's because the rest of Europe wasn't buying Greek olives and weren't going to Greece on vacation. But then exports were doing okay. It's not that bad. What else we have? Unemployment. Let's see government borrowing. So you see the deficits, 4. Even that's where the problem of the Greek economy is. Even in good times, 2002, government ran a deficit. In 2003, the government ran a huge deficit. 2006, 2007 were good years for Greece. And you see they were still running 6, and then 9% deficit. So the problem, the fundamental, it's called the structural problem with Greece was that even when the times were really good, even when the times were great, even when everything seemed to be okay, the government deficit is telling you it was not okay. All right?
It was fake.
Yes, perfect. It was fake. That's how you know that it was a fake prosperity. It was a false prosperity. It was a fake economy. Everything appeared okay on the basis of government plugging in the problems in the economy. But then the problems exploded and you see 15% government deficit. That's totally insane. And it is not insane that the Greek government spent it. You know, it's like giving $10,000 to a woman. Of course she's going to spend it on diamonds or whatever, like any government. The problem was whoever gave her the $15,000 to spend. In this particular case, insanity is of the European countries like Greece, like Germany and France that gave them this money. Who are these insane creditors? Okay? Well, we know, we saw it last time on the presentation. Greek creditors were mostly Greece, France, Italy. Italian banks were also insane, some British banks, and so on. We saw who the creditors are. So the creditors acted totally insane, and then they kept feeding those. And you see, austerity is still halfway through. In other words, they've cut some of the deficit, the official, according to the government, because the real one, of course, is much bigger than this one. Let's see what else we need to take a look at for Greece. Government gross debt we saw, the current account balance, oh, you see the current account balance shrinking but hasn't shrunk enough. So the economy still has a whole lot more to shrink. Well, the economy must shrink a whole lot more to accommodate this current account balance. The economy must shrink to accommodate the debt. So what we're trying to say is that the Greek economy has got a whole lot more to go down until it reaches balance. And it reaches balance when the current account balance gets down to zero or positive, when the government net lending and borrowing gets down to zero or positive. So you run a trade surplus, you run a government budget surplus, and the economy gets down to zero or positive. And the economy is growing under those conditions. Because if you have an account balance of zero, so you're not having net exports, meaning you're not importing, and the government's not running a deficit, but the economy is shrinking at 5%, that's no good.
Is there a country which has such a balance sheet?
Israel, as we're going to see in a few minutes, yeah.
So?
These guys are running one of the better. All right, let's take a look at Bulgaria and see what we can see for Bulgaria here. Let's see what we can see for Bulgaria here. Okay, let's see. This is for product per capita. You see 6.7, 7.1, 6.8, 6.7. How? The standard of living in Bulgaria is not falling. This is very interesting. Another interesting phenomenon for the Bulgarian economy, number 3, is we had a recession in 2009 and 2010 and 11. We're not much of in a recession. So the economy is really stagnant. The economy is choking. The economy is having hard times, but it is not collapsing, not like Greece.
What is keeping the economy that way?
Well, let's see what happened. Okay, see the current account balance? Well, we had huge balances, like 11%, like 17%, like 25%. And then it's shrinking from 23 to 8 to -1 and even positive. So we have been able to balance out, it's called our external economy, our trade deficits, on the basis of shrinking massively our imports. Probably we're going to be able to see that in imports. Let's see if imports show something like that. You see this -24%? We cut imports by 24% in 1 year.
How did you do that?
Well, we don't import as many Mercedes as we did.
In 1 year, it's a huge percentage.
Yes, before you import 100 Mercedes, now you import 75. Before, everybody goes to the Black Sea or Halkidiki for a vacation, driving the car. Now, instead of 100 people going to Halkidiki, 75.
But it is a very big shift in mindset. It requires big discipline, something.
No, it's not a discipline. It's a crisis. People don't have money. If you don't have money in your pocket, you don't spend it. You don't have money, you don't buy Mercedes. It's that simple. You don't have money, you don't buy that HP laptop. Okay? So, the discipline, okay, let's answer that question for you. Government, let's see, government, I just want to make sure, net lending. You see, I just want to make sure I get the gross debt, that's the government debt. So, we had, you see, we are not running huge deficits. You see where's the discipline coming from? The discipline is coming that while the Greek government would run a 10 or 15% deficit, we will not run a deficit here. We run only 3% here. We run 1.5% and we run 0.5% discipline. So, the genuine benefit of government discipline is paying off really well for us Bulgarians. Because if the government doesn't fill the plug, we readjust not through the government, through the imports. Less Halkidiki, less BMW.
You see, that's why I'm saying it's a cultural issue as well.
Let's say it's political culture. our politicians were a lot more disciplined, and the reason for this is not that we're much different than the Greeks. We're just as bad, in many ways worse. It's that we suffered through a disastrous, complete collapse in '97, and people remember that government is not the solution. People remember that government deficit in government spending is not going to fix the problem. And people make sure the government isn't spending that extra money. In other words, there are two ways to adjust. One is through the government deficit, and the other one is through the trade deficit. And one is the bad way, ensuring a disaster. The other one is through the trade deficit. Well, which way? Very simple. We don't go to Halkidiki. Is it going to be a disaster for a family not going to Halkidiki? Not really. Okay. Another way to adjust is you still, and we still buy the BMW. How? Instead of buying a 3-year-old, we buy a 5-year-old. Okay. And the 5-year-old is only half the price. Okay. So we still drive the BMW, but it's a 5-year-old. Okay. And we still buy a laptop, but we're not going to buy the expensive Dell or whatever. We're going to buy a little cheaper laptop. We're going to buy the little netbook, okay? So there are little ways to adjust, okay? We're not going to import German cheese. We're going to buy our Bulgarian cheese. So our economy, the basis for the relative stability of our economy was the relatively fiscal, conservative fiscal, where we're not running. And also see, it's amazing. Bulgarian government has been paying down debt. Notice, 70%, 60%, 50, 40, 30, 29, 29, 18, 15, 15, 14, now 15 and 17. So, the economy is growing fast, we are paying down debt, so we are low on debt, we are low on deficit, and that supports our overall macroeconomic stability. Of course, banks might be unstable because they have financed the real estate bubble, and some banks may have difficulties, a whole different problem. But overall, unemployment, let's see what happens to unemployment here. Unemployment's shooting up. So 9, 6, 5, and then 6, 10, 11. So you got a big jump over here, and then the economy is just holding for the last 3 years, okay? We're just doing okay. We're not doing great. We're not really good, but we're not terrible either. But investment has gone from 34, 37 to 29, 22, 23, 24. So stable, investment has fallen and then stabilized. All right, fair. I mean, you can see some other data